Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of IndieQuest, a celebration of the indie and obscure. I'm here with you, as always. It's me, your host, your friend, Steve, but we're doing things a little bit differently this time. I know you're used to them sweet, dulcet tones of Josh, a frantic, but my man's got a busy life. He's got other obligations. I assume he's spinning up a competing indie games podcast that probably has a bigger budget and larger fan base than ours. So I've called in the cavalry. We have a guest host on with us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. So I go by Captain Drachma on the internet. Some people call me Seth. Trav seems to insist on calling me Seth at certain times on the old Polykill podcast. But I am here to definitely talk some gaming and specifically indie gaming with our pal Blink.
Heck yeah. So Drachma, longtime friend of Polykill, longtime friend of the network, longtime friend of mine. Excited to have him on and help me out talking about some indie games. We both have, I think, good ones selected for you today. But I thought, you know what? Normally we ease in with a little segment. You know, sometimes we do a little itchy trivia or something like that. But we've got a fresh face here. I think it's time to just do a general little meet and greet. So I have a couple questions set up that I'm ready to ask you. Are you feeling good?
I'm feeling great.
He doesn't have a choice, and I wrote it on the sheet. So what's he gonna do?
That's right.
All right. So first of all, you know what? How'd you ever come across this network? What's kind of the bullet points that brings you from stranger on the internet to man sitting on IndieQuest now?
So I think as a lot of us might have come to the Polykill Discord and then the Polymedia Network, I was a fan of the old SNES Drunk. Watched, gosh, I've probably been a sub of Alex since 2015. But, you know, that's how a lot of us came here, I think. We started listening to the Drunk Friend podcast. Great podcast. I always say, come for the Alex, stay for the Trav, right? So
He'd agree with you there for sure.
Yeah. So definitely kind of worked my way in. Started in the SNES Drunk Patreon Discord, and then I remember listening to Drunk Friend one day, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we have a fun Polykill Discord." Like, okay, let's just jump in that old thing, and definitely it has felt like a family. Trav always calls it our phone family, right? So just anytime you ever have anything you want to air out or anything, you got a bunch of buddies in your pocket, and it's awesome. It's the best place on the internet.
It really is. Polykill as a community has a remarkable ability to attract, I would say, very intelligent, very mature, and like surprisingly talented people. Almost everyone in there has some skill that far exceeds anything I have, but I'm happy to see it.
I know, that's what I feel too. It's like, I feel like I'm pretty good at life, but then I get in there and Berger read 17 more books last night. It's just like, okay. You know.
Exactly. Oh, well, awesome. And, being a show about indie games, but we sprinkle a little discussion about other stuff in there too. Let's just kind of lay a little bit of a history down. You know, when did you start gaming? Maybe what genres are you most into? What's the bullet points?
So we always had, I was actually born in 91, so I'm a couple years younger than you, Steve, but we always had an NES, right? So we had actually like 3 NESs, because anybody who's ever owned an NES knows that there's always some component of them that break, right? So we would intermix parts to get our NESs working, and that was definitely my first system. That's how we grew up. Definitely just Super Mario Brothers 3, right? That was the big one. Played the crap out of that. I feel like I can do that first world with my eyes closed at this point. But then I also grew up on a farm, so we'd always be delivering hay and straw to different customers, which means I had a lot of road time. So that is where, if I were to do another podcast, it would probably be some sort of portable podcast, because I love portable gaming.
Now, are you aware that this is the year of the handheld?
I am very aware. I am very aware. I am very excited to hear what you play, honestly, because that brick of a Game Boy was always in my hands, man, when I was growing up. And then, I mean, it just went up from there. I had your regular gray brick Game Boy, graduated to the clear, translucent purple Game Boy Color.
Mm-hmm.
Then what did I have? I had another translucent Game Boy Advance that was also purple, I believe. Did they have one of those? Anyway, I never got an SP. Then I went DS. I remember my sister got a DS before me, and I was like, what the heck? I ended up getting a DS Lite, which was better, so,
Yep.
And then 3DS, multiple 3DSs now, and then, of course, the Switch. So that's in terms of my system background. I've always had a PlayStation. We ended up getting a PlayStation. Skipped the PS2, ended up getting a GameCube, then a Wii, stuff like that. So I kind of always have had multiple consoles in our house growing up. But in terms of like genre of gaming, I enjoy platformers for sure. Gated exploration games, as we call them now on this network, at least.
Yes.
But also, what drove me to what I enjoy now. I remember seeing commercials for this game called Monster Hunter Tri, which was a game for the Wii, and I was like, "Gosh, I," which is weird, right? I mean, it's a Capcom game, so I guess it makes sense that it was on TV and you could see commercials for it. But
Yeah.
it was a very niche game back then. I mean, this was late aughts.
Yeah, I feel I couldn't tell you exactly which Monster Hunter broke through, but I do think it was after that point. That was like maybe not quite as obscure as like the PSP days, but it was still very much it was like a Demon Souls type of thing
Yes.
before Dark Souls hit it big.
Right. I would say Monster Hunter 4 is right around when it started getting popular, and I think it's because they put it on 3DS. So maybe it was more accessible. I'm not sure. I mean, I played the crap out of that game too. Ultimate, right? We didn't get the original, and then it really broke through with World. I mean, everybody was playing World.
Yep.
So that kind of got me to. Trav loves to say that I like to play hard games. It wasn't always that way. I wasn't like out of the womb like give me the hardest thing on every system that you have, right? I was intimidated before. Everybody was intimidated at some point, but I think I just have a lot of stubbornness. I wouldn't even call it determination. I just am stubborn and I don't like to lose, right? At a certain game.
Yep.
So I never was good at Monster Hunter Tri. I was never good at it. I used Great Sword in that game and I was awful. Didn't understand how to play, but I just kept playing and playing and playing. Eventually graduated to Monster Hunter 4, played with a buddy from work, got a lot better, right? We would do that's I think the best part of those games is the group mentality and playing with your friends. It's so much fun. But eventually I remember my buddy was like, you like this game, you should play Dark Souls. It's like, yeah, I guess. He's like, it's a lot like this. I mean, it's pretty similar. So that's where I kind of got like that. I'll start playing Dark Souls, and I picked up DS3, played through about half of that, and I got sucked into PvP. But that's kind of where that difficult game thing came from. And now I was always into the competitive games, like I played League of Legends and stuff like that, Overwatch a little bit. But I get frustrated, I think, online, and I've kind of told myself, it's not for me. The toxic communities, I would rather just get frustrated by myself, I guess. So that's what I chose to do.
That makes sense. Now, I'm the same way. I usually prefer a singular experience. Most indie games tend to be, which makes for a match made in heaven there. And I like difficult games too. I can get down with a tricky one. Usually, if I'm looking for something hard, I like Souls and all that. But I usually turn to like a precision platformer, something like a Super Meat Boy, is my masochism of choice, I'd say.
So that's one that's missing from my backlog. I've never even touched it. I know, I need to. It's one of those things where you guys talk about it on Polykill, right? Or you guys have even talked about it on this show. Mm-hmm. That game that's there that you just want to, it's got to be the right moment and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, you just want to savor it when you start playing it. And I just haven't gotten to that point yet. So
I can't wait. When you do, I'll be very curious to hear what you think, because I think it's a great game. I think it's very well designed. Obviously, it's one of my favorites of all time. But I played it in the context of the time it came out in over 10 years ago at this point, right? So someone who has post Dark Souls, has experienced a lot of these, even if you haven't played them, at least you're aware of a lot of these harder games like Celeste, and Hollow Knight has a reputation for being hard. I'd be curious to go back to hear someone go back to that original, or what in my head is one of the original difficult platformers, and have a take on it. So we may have to chat about that one in the future. But I'm going to throw one at you that I gave you no warning for. because I'm curious. And this one's going to be you having to dig back into your memory. So if you can't recall, no worries. But do you remember what like the first game you played was that you thought of as indie? Or looking back, like what are some of the earliest indie games you remember? Because we're talking about Super Meat Boy. I always go back to, and we had a whole episode on this, I go back to like that late Flash game era to that early Xbox 360 live arcade era as sort of my genesis. And I'm curious if it was the same for you, or maybe you hopped on the indie train later on.
So I remember, this is almost flirting with like homebrew a little bit, but I remember when I have never actually played this game. It's funny because coming on this podcast, every once in a while it just gets in my head and I'm like, why haven't I bought that yet? Like I should just try that out. But I'm assuming you've heard of this game. But have you ever heard of, people pronounce it differently, but Pierre Solar? I don't really know. Pierre Solar.
Yes, I have a copy sitting over on my shelf, but I haven't played more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes of it.
Yes. So that is when I realized that indie games were a thing. Because I remember, I don't know if I saw it in a magazine or just online. I mean, that game came out in like 2010ish. But I remember thinking it was so cool that this lunar-like game was being made, not just made, but they were actually going to make a Genesis cart for it and stuff. And it's like, what? That is the craziest thing. Like people are making games for those old systems, and not just making them for the old systems, but really making them look like that and using that hardware to make it. And yeah, it got HDified later on, but that was my first memory of, oh, that's different. Like that's not Capcom or Nintendo making that game. It's Watermelon or something like that, I think they're called. But yeah.
That's a really good pull. And what everyone has to remember is, these days that's a relatively common thing. Even like major publishers will have collector's editions that come in like a Genesis style case or an NES style box that harkens back to those old games. But in like late 2000s, early teens, like 2010 era, it was a pretty novel idea for a game, like a new game, to be published with all of the like supporting materials, case manual, everything on a retro console. It was one of the first ones I remember. So you're bringing me back. That's a great answer. I love that.
I actually looked a little up about it, and I guess I never really looked far into it, but apparently it's difficult. Like they really factored in some of that classic RPG, JRPG tropey stuff where it's limited inventory and stuff like that. So maybe I'm spoiled at this point and I wouldn't want to do that. Like that is not my flavor of difficulty. I like something that's going to test my skill, not necessarily to test my patience. Right. So
I don't know what it says about me, but I can have my patience tested. I've talked about it before, but and this would be a topic for a whole other show, but I think there's something to getting yourself into the right frame of mind. Like I'm going to commit to playing this game on its own terms. That gets me a little more willing to try stuff like that. But yeah, I don't blame you at all.
Yep.
All right. So, are there any indie games that are coming out in the future that you're particularly looking forward to? Anything on the horizon that is tickling your fancy?
So typically, and maybe this isn't a great thing, it's going to be something I need to start looking into if I am going to be in the indie sphere more often at all. But typically, I just like what's coming out, or I'll jump on Steam, because honestly, I'm on my nice, shiny new computer, but I have never really been a PC gamer. Like I always had a gaming PC, and I played League of Legends on it. That was it. And I never really had Steam account or anything, so a lot of this Steam stuff is new to me. I was a console boy forever, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I was on PlayStation 4 and I'd peruse the PS Store and stuff like that. So just getting on Steam now sometimes and clicking on specials and just letting stuff just what's on there,
Yep.
So something I actually did see recently, it is out now, but it's an indie game technically, but it's a very well polished indie game, is Sifu. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, so that one just came out as of the time when we're recording this, and yeah, it looks amazing. I'm not usually much of like a beat 'em up brawler type of guy, but man, that game's got a style to it.
It does. I mean, I've heard people liken it to like it's like you're playing as Bruce Lee type of thing, which is pretty cool. You know what I mean? So that's something that I saw prior to it releasing, and definitely was like, oh, that's pretty darn cool. I mean, other than that game, as everybody probably is, I am just cannot wait. I'm bated breath waiting for Silk Song, and who knows when that's coming.
Yep, that was going to be my answer too. At this point, it's like, is Silk Song ever going to come out, or is it just a dream that lives in our collective consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, who does not want to play as Hornet? I mean,
I know.
just like one of the coolest NPC characters in any game I've ever played. She doesn't have any spoken dialogue. She's only got her, yeah, that stuff. But she is just amazing. Like, God, I love Hollow Knight in general. Like, Hollow Knight was one of those indie games that really made me fall in love with indie games in general. Like, it's such a good game.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorites. There's actually right above my computer monitor right here. It's one of the few things people can never see. People see a lot of my game room, but this is the only thing that's behind the camera. My partner, she got me print of the garden area, and it has 2 magnetic pins, one of Hollow Knight, one of Hornet, and you can move them around on the print to set them into different, basically battle animation poses.
Yeah,
and so
that's awesome.
That's my equivalent of Silk Song. Is every day I just move them around a little bit and pretend like I'm playing the sequel. That's the best I could do.
Yeah. Oh man, I cannot wait for that.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. But now everyone, they have a little bit of taste of where you came from, what you're into, what you're looking forward to. So the only the elephant in the room that we just got to clear up is Captain Drachma. I mean, Seth, I get that's a name humans have, but where did this Captain Drachma name come from?
So it came from a game called Skies of Arcadia that originally came out on the Dreamcast and was re-released as Legends on the GameCube, right? So,
yep.
Honestly, it's a great game, and I am I guess I didn't mention that part. I am a huge JRPG fan, but I was just playing that game at the time, and I think my name on YouTube at the time was like Seth last name, right? So, and I was just like, that's so stupid. Like, I need to have an actual name, and I was like, this pirate dude with one hand is sweet, and I like him. Like, he's cool, and I'll just be Captain Drachma on YouTube. Like, it'll never go anywhere. It's the same story. It's the same story that Alex tells about SNES Drunk, right? It's like,
yep.
And it's not like I'm SNES Drunk, obviously, but like, he's just like, I didn't think anything was going to happen. I just picked a name. And that's kind of how it went too. Like, it was just like, I just picked a name, and it's really stuck. Like, every time I jump into a Hungry Garaya stream, she's just always like, oh, Captain Drachma. Like, I jumped into her Skies of Arcadia stream, and oh, you're in this game, stuff like that. So it's pretty funny.
That's awesome. I've talked to tons of people about this, and I think every single person I've ever talked to about their online handle, they all either don't like it or it was not thought very hard about. Like, everyone just kind of created something because they needed a name, or they're like, they spent 2 seconds and like, I guess this is kind of a cool word, I'll just use this, and then we're all permanently stuck with it for all time. So
yes, exactly. I mean, I think of being at MagFest and walking around with our group, right? Like, our mutual buddy Ross, and I'll say he's our mutual buddy now because I shared a room with him in a hotel. So
I never have. So
exactly,
good on you.
Exactly. One up on Steve. But Trav and Berger, right? It's funny because they're all like, Drock, they'll yell at Drock across the arcade or whatever. It's like, yeah, I guess that's kind of my name, right? Like, that's how we communicate. And so it was just funny, but yeah, that's just how it goes, right?
Yep. We're all just victims of our past decisions in that regard.
Yep,
so.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, good to get to know you. Anything you want to ask me? Fair's fair.
Yes. So I did have 2 quick questions. The first one's going to be more or less serious. The second one's going to be not serious at all. So my first one, because I don't really personally know anybody else playing it currently, and this isn't indie. This is actually about as far from indie as possible. But what are you thinking about Pokemon Legends Arceus right now?
Ooh, all right. I will keep it brief. I will say I'm a Pokemon fan. I have played every generation that's come out, for better or worse. I tend to like all of them. I like what the series does. I'm usually not actually a big open world guy. I haven't played a lot of the tentpole open world games. I've never really seriously played Skyrim. I've never played any of the modern Assassin's Creeds after the first one. It's not usually a genre I go for, but it being Pokemon is just enough to hook me and get me in. And what I really like about Arceus, however you want to pronounce it, is they've got this like 2 or 3 different loops that you can sort of hop in between. Whenever one starts to get boring, you can jump to another one and entertain yourself. So you can push through on the story a little bit. You can learn about these sort of like enraged, sort of like pseudo legendary Pokemon in each area. And when you get bored of that, then you can hop over and people have a bunch of side quests that are like, oh, I need you to chase down this Pokemon, or here's a picture of a Pokemon that is like mostly obscured. Can you deduce what the Pokemon is and then go catch one and show it to me? Or can you go to this specific area? And then when you're done with that, there's all the Pokedex stuff, where the game has a bunch of research tasks and criteria that get you to battle a bunch of the same type of Pokemon, catch a bunch of the same type of Pokemon, like weird novel things like, how many, catch 3 Zubat during the daytime, even though they only spawn at night. So you have to like stand right next to one waiting for it to switch over. So I've been really liking it. I've actually been very pained that I haven't had more time to play it. I'm always like desperately looking over at my Switch, hoping that work clears up and other obligations clear the way. But I'm quite enjoying it. Have you played it, or do you plan on playing it?
Yes, I have been playing it, so that's why I was wondering, because it's like you can get online and see anybody's opinions, right? But it's just having a buddy playing it. But it is, I think some people have likened it to, I don't know, to comparing it to whatever adventure games, right? So I mentioned earlier how I enjoy Monster Hunter. It is literally Pokemon cross Monster Hunter. I mean, you have a limited inventory. You're out dodge rolling around, right? That's Monster Hunter. Other than, I mean, it's literally you're not even like going zone to zone. You pick a zone, just like in Monster Hunter, and you go there, and you can go so far out into whatever, but there's still barriers. You can only go so far in any direction, right? And it kind of holds you in. So that's really what it reminds me of. So many of the mechanics. I really feel like, I could be wrong, but I really feel like they drew inspiration from Monster Hunter, and I love both those series. And it's kind of like they had a baby. It's pretty cool. So
I've never played a Monster Hunter, so that makes me more interested in checking one out. I will say my favorite thing to do in Arceus is you can open up your map, and on the map you can see like basically like the blood stains from a Souls game, or I think Death Stranding had a mechanic very similar to this, where you can see backpacks of people that have died in the world, and just trying to venture out and reach one of those backpacks, and then like the sort of organic trouble you get yourselves into by crawling through areas with Pokemon that are way higher level than you, and like running into these alpha versions of them. It's been surprisingly tense for a Pokemon game, and that is probably the thing that I most look forward to doing, is just exploration and like getting into just enough trouble to make things interesting without actually full on dying.
yes, yep, that's it's way more difficult. Like I like to Nuzlocke Pokemon games, which is where it's like a hardcore Pokemon, right? You just make up your own rules. But there's been times when I'm like, I have 4 party members just fainted, and I'm like, I guess I better zoom on back to the camp here, or else I'm going to be wiped in the middle of the field. So it's definitely been interesting. There's been some weird glitches that I've experienced, but I'm not entirely sure if that's just one-off stuff or not. But overall, it's been definitely solid. So all right,
very fun.
Second question. We got into this a little bit, very, very briefly, and I think that listeners might want to hear the take of an actual Minnesotan on duck, gray, duck. So, a little backstory to this. I found like a meme or something from Twitter where a girl said that her boyfriend told her that in Minnesota they don't play duck, goose like the rest of the country, at least world probably. They play duck, gray duck. And I just my question is, so when I play when I was a little kid and we were playing Duck Duck Goose, the game is you go around and you tap your buddies on the head and say duck 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 and whatever. And then when you get to more than likely either your best friend or your crush, you say goose, and then they chase you around. How does Duck Duck Gray Duck work? Is it exactly the same?
100%, 100% the exact same game. I grew up my entire life. I've always called it Duck Duck Gray Duck. I say my entire life, like I was 17 years old and still playing. But but until I was on the internet, I was not aware that this was a weird thing to do. But yes, I've always played it Duck, 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 Gray Duck. And so when people say Duck Duck Goose, it sounds wrong in my mouth. I'm like, so that must be like the off-brand, like the knockoff. Duck Duck Goose is the version I would buy at Five Below. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not for it. But I couldn't explain why, because I've never in my life seen a gray duck. I mean, in Minnesota, the duck you most often see is just like a mallard. So it's just for whatever reason, language is weird. In the same way that I guess in Minnesota, most people call it pop. I think that might be more popular in a lot of the Midwest areas.
Yeah, we call it pop.
Versus like soda. But no, it's gray duck. Always has been, always will be.
I was thinking about this prior to coming on here, and I was like, God, Duck Duck Goose versus Duck Duck Gray Duck, so weird. And then it just got jumping up in my head, and I was like, Duck Duck Gray Goose? No, that's like what Petey does with her liquor cabinet. I'm like, which one are we gonna go for today? Anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, now that everyone's lost respect for me because I play a weird version of a children's game, what do you say we talk about some indie games?
I'm ready.
I'm down for it. All right. So it's one of those things where Josh isn't around. There's no one to tell me I can't do it. So I'm taking a little bit of a liberty with my game that I'm bringing this time. Normally I'd bring just one game, but I'm bringing a collection. And the reason I am is because I feel like really I would never bring these games separately. Like I would never take up 2 episodes to bring each one on their own, and I really wouldn't have very much unique to say about one versus the other. And they are packaged and sold as a collection in a lot of places, so I'm bringing the collection, I'm bringing both at once as sort of like one cohesive piece. And that game is Mutant Mudds Collection, which is a combo of the game Mutant Mudds Deluxe and Mutant Mudds Super Challenge. So right out the gate, have you played of / have you heard of these games?
I have definitely heard of them. I have definitely watched trailers, watched video of people play them, but I've never played them myself.
Okay, cool. So for anyone who's not aware of these, both of these games are developed by a studio that formerly was called Renegade Kid. So at the time these games were originally published, the studio's name was Renegade Kid. That studio, and I don't know the exact details, I should have looked it up. They have since rebranded and renamed as Atooi, Atooi, and I think that as part of that rebrand, they may have combined or merged with another studio, or they added some additional talent, so it wasn't just a rename. But now you know them as Atooi, and in the past they were known as Renegade Kid. These games specifically were very indie. They were developed by 3 people. All the programming and some of the design was done by a man named Matthew Gambrell. The art and a lot of the design was done by Jules Watsham. And I think Jules is the name that most people sort of associate with this studio. Probably the most well-known, at least on like Twitter and things. And then the composer was Troop Gamage. And I apologize if I'm butchering that name at all. But these games originally came out, these are just very traditional 2D platforming games. They came out initially as 3DS downloadable content. Well, actually, the first one came out. Mutant Mudds was a downloadable game on the 3DS. And then later on, that got sort of a repackaged version with a little bit of extra content and I think slightly improved visuals as Mutant Mudds Deluxe, which is what you'll usually see the game as. And then what they did several years later is they released a sequel to it called Mutant Mudds Super Challenge, and that came out in 2016, and it's very much like a Mario Bros. Lost Levels, where it is designed to be much harder levels than the first game, and it's for people that played through and sort of did everything in the first game, here's a hard mode for that. So here's a bunch of surprisingly difficult levels that will put everything you learned in the first game to the test and also throw some new challenges your way too. So there's a lot of ways for people to get and play this game. It's available essentially everywhere. It's on 3DS, like I mentioned, and on Wii U and Switch. It's on PS3, 4, and 5 as part of backwards compatibility. It's on the Vita. It's on mobile. It's on Windows. It's on Steam. This collection in particular I know is downloadable on the Switch, is where probably most people will see it. Or if you're a fan of limited run games and the physical runs that they produce, this is part of the Atui collection, which is sort of famous for being the last physically printed 3DS game which Limited Run put out, which included these 2 games and then 3 or 4 others from that studio. So we have a combo platter of 2 games, Mutant Mudds Deluxe, Mutant Mudds Super Challenge. Now, the actual gameplay, sort of the overview is, it is a 2D platformer, very level-based. Every level has 100 of these little, I guess you'd call them coins, but little icons that you can collect. And it has one main gimmick or one main mechanic that sets it apart. It is, you can, at certain key spots of the level, there'll be these little sort of like arrow platforms that will either let you jump into the background or into the foreground. So if you jump into the foreground, your character gets pretty big, takes up a significant chunk of the screen, and the platforming is usually more about like limited visibility and planning your jumps and things like that. And if you jump into the background, you're much smaller, so that's where it tends to be a little bit more about precision movement and dodging enemies and things like that. And then the middle ground is sort of a blend of both of those.
So is it kind of like the Wario game on Virtual Boy, right?
Exactly. I was just going to say, yep. If you're familiar with Wario Land Virtual Boy, very, very similar to that. And it makes sense, right? Because it came out on 3DS, so that 3D foreground and background was a lot more pronounced when you're playing it with the 3D enabled. So
there was a game on Saturn, Guardian Crusade or something?
Guardian Heroes.
Guardian Heroes.
Yeah.
Yes. Guardian Heroes, and they did that, right? It was like a beat 'em up, but they jumped back and forth. That was cool.
Yep, exactly. Very, very similar to that. Just like cranked up to 11 because your dude gets small when he goes into the background. And so the story realistically isn't why you're playing this game. It's not much to speak of, but the platforming mechanics are you actually have a pretty low move speed, which might get in some people's way. It might not. Your character doesn't move super fast, and there's no run like there is in a Mario game, but you have a short hover. So it's very much like think Super Mario Sunshine or maybe Yoshi's Island, where it lets you adjust a little bit, correct mistakes just a little bit by hovering slightly to the side or slightly over a spike that you might be about to hit, things like that. And so that in the first game, in Mutant Mudds Deluxe, is sort of a CYA mechanic. It lets you make sure that you don't get into a situation you don't want to. When you get into Super Challenge, there's no like using that to fix any of your mistakes, because they've really pushed like the limits of how far you can hover before it runs out and where you can land. You'll need all that juice to get to the next platform.
See, there's Demon's Crest.
Oh.
What were the NES games? What are those called?
Gargoyle's Quest?
Gargoyle's Quest allowed you to hover very briefly too, and be able to correct mistakes most of the time, right? But it was built into that game, so I wonder if that's where they got that idea from. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, very, very possible. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And that's actually sort of just a good lead into this whole game. Is very much like a celebration of, I would say, NES and SNES era platformers visuals. It's got that very crisp, like sharp pixel art where they're kind of going for a Super Nintendo aesthetic, but it's a lot cleaner than a Super Nintendo ever would have actually been able to produce. And so I think these games look phenomenal. But as you start going through them, really A to B is just the objective. There are these more, I guess, limited collectibles that you're hunting and seeking out. Things that are sort of akin to in like the modern Mario games, like the big coins where there's 5 of them hidden in every level. It's these different icons that you'll be hunting down and trying to find, in addition to all the little coins. Once you've collected enough of them, you'll be able to unlock and get into the final area. And those coins that you're collecting as you go through will unlock some additional movement options, and you can usually take one of them with you. So you'll unlock the ability to hover for longer, or the ability to have like a powered up shot, because you also do have a small pea shooter gun, or the ability to do a huge vertical jump, which honestly tends to be the most OP one, because if you jump very high vertically, you can fall and hover very far horizontally. So that's usually the one that I ended up picking. It's a good way for them to mix up the gameplay, but also then they hide bonus levels that are usually locked behind spots that you can only access using one of those 3 powers. So it's a little bit of like replayability, where as you go through a level, you'll discover, oh, look, there's a ledge I can't jump up to. If I come back with the super jump, I'll be able to make it up there. And then the bonus levels are all themed after other consoles. So they'll have like a traditional Game Boy color scheme, a Virtual Boy color scheme, all that stuff. So there is a lot to find and a lot to hunt out, but it's never too repetitive or anything like that.
So the coins,
Yeah.
are they a requirement? Is it something you want to collect all of in order to complete the game, or do you not need to? Like, I'm thinking about it in a speed run fashion. Do you need them? Like, would a speedrunner get them, or would they just fly through the levels?
They would just fly through the levels. The other collectible, that's the one that you need a certain amount of to unlock the final areas. There are, you sort of like go through a progression of, world 1, 1, 1, 2, and then after 4 stages or so, you'll get to a boss, and you have to beat that boss to sort of like wrap up that area. So it's a combination of the bosses plus those more limited collectibles that'll get you through to the end game. Really, it's just to unlock those powers. And then it's also fun. I can't remember if this is true of Mutant Mudds Deluxe, but it's definitely true of Super Challenge. They have very well hidden unlockable character skins, which all are borrowed, or they're basically all just characters from other well-known indie games. I feel like that's pretty popular at the time. Like there was this like group of indies that all seemed to sort of share assets and be willing to work with each other. So you can unlock skins for, I think in Super Deluxe you can unlock the Spelunky guy. You can unlock, I think, Shantae, the VVVVVV guy. A lot of those well-known indie mascot type characters you can unlock as skins. And they don't have different like movement abilities or anything like they would in Super Meat Boy. It's just like a fun bonus for you to find.
It seems like Shovel Knight has made his way into so many different indie games that I've played. Like, oh, Shovel Knight's in this one too. So that's funny that you said that.
Exactly. Soundtrack is kind of what you'd expect based on the game I just described. Very much has, honestly, what you were saying earlier about Pure Solar very much has like a homebrew chiptune sort of vibe. Very upbeat, very catchy, especially like the main menu has like the type of melody that gets in your head, gets you tapping your toes. So if you're looking for just like a real sort of bubbly, fun chiptune soundtrack with a little bit of variety, I would definitely recommend that people check it out.
Nice.
So I will say, as we sort of like wrap the overall details of this game, very much you should play the first one first. If you jump into Super Challenge first, you probably won't like it too much because it does not pull any punches. It's difficult right out of the gate. It's very much a start with Deluxe.
So something that seems to happen a lot with the difficult game or version of a game coming out. If I were a big fan of the game and then I didn't play it for a year, would I want to dip my toe back in and then jump into the Super Deluxe?
It depends on how much of that muscle memory you retained. Yeah. You might want to play a couple runs of some of the levels in Deluxe and then go to Super Challenge. If you're familiar with the mechanics of the game, which aren't that complex, you could sort of shake off the rust in the first stage or two. But it's something where you're definitely going to die in this game. So you have to be ready to hit some spikes and start over again.
Cool.
And my last sort of like note on this one is if what I described sounds fun to you, you're going to really like it. It is very much a game that was designed and developed initially in 2012. Like this is, you compare it to some of the very high production indies of the modern era, and this game might appear slight. But if you go in sort of understanding that and set your expectations appropriately, I think they're very fun. I personally played both of these on the Vita, and I think they make great Vita games. They look super sharp on that OLED screen, and yeah, they're just like comfort food, fun type of platformer games.
Nice. Yeah, I typically don't like to. I don't know if you're in the same vein, being a handheld pro. I don't love playing difficult games on a handheld. I have a hard time with that sometimes because I don't know if it's because you're moving, you're shaking your hands around when you're playing, but I mean, a platformer's a platformer though. It's always at home on a handheld for sure.
Yeah, yep. I'm the same way most of the time too. Like a Super Meat Boy, which I talk about all the time. I really can't get too far into that game on the Vita, but I can burn through it on like a PS4 controller. So this game has the advantage of it's at least that later one is difficult, but like I said, the movement speed is pretty slow, so you can be a little more meticulous about like what you're doing and where you're going, and so I think that makes it pretty suitable to a handheld. And just like the screen real estate, everything was designed initially for the 3DS, so it's designed for you to be able to sort of understand what you're looking at on a mobile or on a handheld screen. So
right, yeah, that's cool. I'll definitely have to check it out. I mean, I have often looked at it and thought to myself, oh man, that looks like a great game, and being a platformer fan, I will definitely have to check that out soon.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. So as we always do, we hit the end of our overview of the game, and it's time to place this puppy on the quest log. And you're asking yourself, Steve, Blink, Drachma's co-host, what the heck's a quest log? You can check it out at bit.ly/questlog. The quest log is our massive list of all sorts of wonderful indie games. And spoilers, we don't bring things to the show that we don't like. And so this isn't a list of every game ranked best to worst. We categorize them into two different chunks. We've got the side quest, which is it's either like something we think is good but maybe has some flaw holding it back from being an all-time great, or more often I think it's a type of game that is good but you got to be in the right mood for it, or you have to appreciate this genre to enjoy. And then we have the main quest, which is sort of our, it's our cake topper. These are the games that we absolutely love. We'd highly recommend to anyone. It's one of those things where if you are looking for an indie game to play and you're not sure what to check out, just scroll down that main quest. You find anything that you haven't played before that's on there. It's a glowing recommendation from me and from my co-host. So when it comes to Mutant Mudds Deluxe, I think for me this one, it is defined by the fact that it's a comfy side quest game. It's doing one thing very well. It's a good platformer. If you're a fan of 2D platformers, you're going to enjoy your time with it. But this certainly isn't doing anything that would pull non-platformer fans in. It's not, if you played some of these NES or Super Nintendo era platforming games and you're like, yeah, they didn't really do it for me, or they were kind of slight, or there wasn't enough there. This isn't like a full, robust experience that's going to completely change your mind. But if you are looking for something that I think is comfy, it's easy playing, great to play while you're watching like a show. I played them while I was watching Games Done Quick, or even just like while you have a podcast going or something. These are just good to like get your hands moving, very enjoyable to play, very satisfying, but yeah, not like what I would consider to be an all-time classic or anything like that. Based on what I said, would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, based on the things I've seen of it, it definitely seems like a side quest type game. That very cartoony, but not. It doesn't necessarily have to be overly epic of a game and to be a main quest. But that just, like you said, I think that's what they set out to accomplish. Knowing full well that we probably have some Polykill listeners, How long does this take to beat? At least the original.
Oh, not too long. I'd say you could probably get through, if you're not going for everything, in a handful of hours. Really not too long at all. Even if you are going for everything, it's not too brutal. The Super Challenge, that one will take you a little bit longer. I think I spent probably 6 or 7 hours going through that one, and I collected most of what I could, but I didn't seek out every single unlockable character. So if you buy the package, I would say you'll get somewhere between like a solid 7 to 10 hours of fun.
Any platformer that is a 4 to 5-ish hour game or less, I am
Yeah.
all over. That's just that, like, right before it starts to overstay its welcome, you finish, right? That's just
Yep.
perfect. So,
Awesome. Yep. So, and again, I always have to remind everyone I'm an apologist. Something being on the side quest is not because it isn't worth your time. It's very much worth your time to go check any of those games out as well. But, Drachma, my friend, I believe you've brought me a game as well.
I have brought you a game, Steve, and I had initially, for the listeners, I had initially told Steve that I was going to do a different game, but I don't know if he checked.
Well, he teased me. He didn't put the name of the game into the sheet, and so I had to, from context clues, guess what it was. Now
I see that now. I didn't.
There's some obvious ones that I was able to figure out what it was, but yes, I did get bait and switched here.
Yeah. Well, my thought was, how can I come to my first ever IndieQuest and not talk about this game, because it's almost what I'm known for. Discord pal Dylan the other day said, well, Drachma's played this specific game I'm about to talk about on his toaster. So I have to talk about it at this point, because I do have a version on my toaster, and it's not quite as good as the Steam version, but it's not bad. So without further ado, I am going to be bringing Enter the Gungeon to IndieQuest today.
Heck yeah! Now, I 100% associate this game with you too. Like, I could not tell you much of what you've played, but if you were Ash Ketchum, this would be the Pikachu sitting next to you in my heart. So, I'm particularly excited because I've never played this. I've really never even seen it. I've seen some screenshots and mostly some marketing. So I'm fresh. Tell me about this.
I will start by saying that there could be a lot worse Pikachus sitting next to me, so I'm happy that it's Enter the Gungeon. All right, so Enter the Gungeon was developed by Dodge Roll. It came out in 2016. It is basically a bullet hell, twin stick, roguelike action game. Think it's kind of a top-down 1632-bit-ish. Actually, the graphical style in a lot of ways is a lot like Mutant Mudds to me, right? It's that throwback, trying to be Super Nintendo, but like you said, I love how you said it. Looks like it could have played on Super Nintendo, but there's no way it ever would have played on Super Nintendo, right? Or Genesis, even with blast processing. So it is known as a difficult game, right? Like this is the indie game that is, You played Enter the Gungeon? Oh, that's a hard game. Like, I've heard that's hard. And that's honestly my initial kind of how I heard about Enter the Gungeon was, I believe I played Dead Cells, another great game. Mm-hmm. And I was looking online for games like Dead Cells, right? So somebody somewhere on Reddit or something said, "Oh, Enter the Gungeon. Enter the Gungeon's a hard game. It's way harder than Dead Cells." You know how the gatekeeping Reddit is, right?
Yeah.
Especially for their hard games. So it's like, oh, you think Dead Cells is hard? You should play Enter the Gungeon. Like, whatever, So I didn't jump into it like immediately. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to jump right into Enter the Gungeon. So kind of a little bit of backstory on Dead Cells. I'm not going to go into it, but I beat Dead Cells on Boss Cell 0, and I thought I was sweet. And then I played Boss Cell 1 and got annihilated and shut my Switch off and pretended like it never happened. So it's not like I'm great at every difficult video game. I didn't smack my head against a wall. But our friend Caleb J. Ross actually got me a Stadia for our Secret Santa.
Oh,
and
that checks out, yeah.
Yeah, I know, it truly does. So I hooked that bad boy up, and Stadia, as most people probably know by now, is a subscription service basically where you can stream video games immediately on your TV, right, through like a Fire Stick or like a Chromecast, right?
Yeah.
So you get like 3 months free. I just got on there and started perusing the games, right, the stuff that's on there for free. Lo and behold, one of those games was Enter the Gungeon. And like I said, I'd heard about it. So I'm like, oh, I definitely probably would like this game. If people said it's difficult and that's up my alley, right? So I'll check it out. So, Enter the Gungeon, kind of the overview of what this game is. Like I said, 1632-bit, action-y. bullet hell. You basically have 4 characters to start. Choose any of them, and you can go through the game with whichever one you want. You start on the initial floor, and you basically work your way down through 5 different floors. So the way that I think that for anybody, Enter the Gungeon is a very popular game. It's sold over 3 million copies. So I think that a lot of people have probably played it or at least watched it. But I know for a fact that a lot of people have played a very popular game from 2 years ago now, which is Hades. So the level layout, it isn't exactly the same, but just the kind of your progression through the game is very similar. Think Hades. It's randomized. The rooms themselves are not randomized, but the layout of the rooms is randomized every time. So as you're running the game, you start to recognize, oh, I've been here before.
Like you see, and I think that is true of Hades too, right? Where you're like, I've seen this room or this like combination of things stitched together before, even if what's inside of it might be different, might be adjusted.
So actually, for the most part, for each room, there's a couple different variations of how enemies usually pop up. But for the most part, you get pretty used to how those enemies are going to pop, right? So I think even Hades, gosh, I remember. I recently completed Hades, but you kind of get used to that too, right? Like, oh, this is especially like what's the 3rd level, Elysium?
Yes.
And you start to get used to where those armored enemies pop up, right? And they're just like, oh, but you get used to it after a while. And it's like, oh, nice, like I can kind of plan my layout, and that's exactly what you do with Gungeon, right? You know exactly which enemy's going to pop up where as soon as you kind of recognize what part of which room you're in, and you can work around that way. So, like I said, it's difficult. So there are bullets all over the place. I guess that'll kind of segue me into your gameplay, right?
Yep.
So bullets are coming at you at all times. Floor 1 is somewhat simple. Let's get used to the game. Still very, very, very hard though, honestly. Like, I remember my first run through, I was like, I don't know if I want to continue to play this game.
Oh, wow.
Like, it is so hard. Like, initially, right? Like, you don't know what you're doing, and it's just like, oh my, you're just getting killed constantly. Then you finally make it to the first boss, and you just get annihilated, and it's just like, how much of this game is there? And of course, you Google it, and it's like, oh, it's going to beat the crap out of you for an entire hour in order to actually beat it. Like, I just died in 3.5 minutes. You expect me to multiply that by 20 in order to actually beat this game? Like, this is nuts.
So you mentioned a bit ago that there's multiple characters.
Yes.
Do they play differently? Like, are some of them maybe good beginner characters, or how does that factor in?
Yeah. So, no.
Okay.
They each have a different starting weapon, and the starter weapon is not something you want to keep your entire playthrough. Right? Or you're going to keep it. You don't ever drop it. You can't drop it, but it's not something you're going to want to use. It's unlimited ammo. So when all else fails, that's your fallback, right? Like in most of your shooters, right? You always have your pistol that you don't want to ever use forever. Yeah. You want to pick something else up and use that. So, but each one, yes, there are some that are somewhat more beginner friendly. The Marine starts with an extra armor, so you basically can take an extra hit over the other guys.
Okay.
The Convict, when you get hit, you do double damage. It's like a rage.
Oh.
A lot of people don't like her because of that, but honestly, I kind of got the furthest with her when I initially started playing because I was getting hit constantly.
Yeah.
Right? So I might as well be doing more damage while I'm getting hit. Like I got to get somewhere in this game, right? So, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, they're pretty much carbon copies of each other, other than a couple passives and their starting weapons.
Okay.
Everyone loves the Hunter because she has a dog, and you can pet the dog.
Well, that Twitter account is certainly happy to hear that. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, literally, you just stand there and you can pet the dog to make yourself feel better from getting your butt kicked the entire game. So, typically with these games, you would think it's hard, right? It's really hard. So, I want to get to the end as quickly as possible and win, right? I want to beat the game. So, that isn't really how this works. You almost want to floor clear every single floor.
Is there like a experience system, or is that just like to increase your chances for drops? What's the advantage to doing that?
So basically, enemies drop shells, gold basically, right? And you use that stuff in the shop to buy stuff. He sells health, which early on you're probably going to buy some health. As you get better at the game, you won't need to. But it's definitely nice to be able to pick up those shells, to be able to buy stuff in the shop. The reason you do it, but you can buy keys as well, and that's the reason you do it, right? There are 2 chests in every floor, and you want to open all chests you see. If you have the ability to open a chest, you want to, because that has a gun in it or a passive item, and that allows you to make it further, right? The more guns you have, the better of a chance you're going to be able to, because you might unlock that gun you're either really good with or just a really good gun in general. So
Okay.
you want to try to clear, make as much money as possible. And it seems counterintuitive, because when you're just starting out the game, you're like, I'm getting my butt kicked. Why the heck would I want to get my butt kicked more and clear another room? But it kind of works in conjunction with, you need to do that to get better at the game anyway, right? You're not very skilled when you first start. You need to practice. And the only way to get better at a game is to practice it. And it's basically telling you, if you practice me, I will give you stuff. So do that, right? And then that eventually makes you better at the game.
I love that sort of like natural design that's guiding you down a specific path to become better and get farther in this game. They're basically like funneling you with rewards to teach you, this is the way you're going to be most successful.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the way that it really teaches you that is right out of the first floor. This isn't really spoilery at all. There is a secret level that you can go to that's harder than the first, second. A lot of people think that it's like one of the harder levels in the game. Most people encourage even new players to go to that floor, not only for the practice, but every floor you go to, you get more items, and that's what you want. So you go there and you get more chests, more gold, and that's how you make it through and can continue your way up. So a lot of people liken this, I have not played this game yet, but a lot of people have, right, to Binding of Isaac.
I was just going to ask it. In my head, the closest parallel, other than all the Hades discussion, seems to be Binding of Isaac, specifically in the way that, Binding of Isaac is one floor with a randomized set of rooms. And even when you find the exit, you can backtrack and go explore all the other spokes and all the other paths to be like, okay, where can I find upgrades, modifiers, currency, all that stuff. So and that's different from like a Hades where you're always moving forward. You can't backtrack.
Correct.
And it's a little different from something like a Dead Cells where even though you can like backtrack in Dead Cells, it's sort of like A to B type level structure. So you're more encouraged to kind of just keep pushing onward.
Correct. So there's a map system basically, right? So you can actually see there's like a little question mark for every room that you have gone, like next to a room that you've gone in, right? It's not going to show you the whole map right out of the gate. You're going to have to explore a map, and then it'll give you some stems to other rooms, right? And then you know that there's a room there. So typically, if you find the boss, it's a big like it's a door lord, right? Door lord is what the boss is. It's this door, right? It's like a skull door. It's got a picture of it, right? And you walk in there like, oh, there's the boss. And then typically, immediately, what my runs are or anybody's runs, you find the boss, like, okay, go explore the rest of the level and get everything, and then go fight the boss. Give yourself the best chance possible to beat that boss. So
that makes sense. So as you're like learning this game, you're sort of following that funnel. How long would you say, and this is always so hard and so different for everyone when it comes to roguelikes, but what's like the number of hours you'd expect me to put in to be able to get my first clear, my first successful run?
So I actually, I couldn't remember what mine was. I think I had probably 120-ish deaths before I finally did it. The average run takes between 45 minutes and an hour.
Okay.
But so many of those deaths occurred in like 2 minutes, right? Especially when I was early on. So it didn't take any time at all. But I think that when I looked it up on how long to beat, it was about 25 hours.
Okay. So that's pretty comparable to some of those other games that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Fun fact, do you happen to know what your hour count in this game is?
I remember you said something on Twitter about what are the games you've played the longest, or what game have you put 500 hours into? And I said Gungeon. I don't know that, but I am almost positive.
You feel it in your soul. You know it.
Stadia doesn't track your hours played, which
Oh,
sucks.
wow.
So I can get on Steam now and look. And Switch, I could figure it out because I actually do own it on technically three systems, right? Well, at Stadia, you don't own anything on Stadia, I guess, technically. But
Yeah.
so I don't own it on Stadia, but I played it on Stadia. I own it on Switch, and now I own it on Steam and my toaster. So, but, yeah. So I mean, I've definitely put a cumulative 500 hours into it without a doubt.
Have you gotten a clear on that toaster? Have you made it all the way through?
Yeah, before the toast pops.
Oh, my man.
So
That's
that
awesome.
is actually a nice segue. I actually recently started speedrunning that game.
Really? I did not
Yes.
know this. Very cool.
Yes. So my current best clear is 1809, and that's good
Awesome.
for about 140th, right around there.
Still.
So the best top or whatever world record, whatever you want to call it, 7. So,
7 minutes, that is.
7 minutes flat. I think 7 flat.
Wow.
And of course on speedrun.com, I need to get a capture card so I can actually do this because I don't have that.
Yeah,
I
we
don't
need
have the
streams of
ability to
this.
upload
What are
it.
you doing? to me?
Yes, I know. I actually have streamed a little bit with the Discord and some people watching, but yeah, I mean, 7 minutes. It's incredible. So you can go on there and see how he did it. That's the thing with Gungeon. Like, it's random. There's so much RNG. That will kind of segue a little bit into the guns. There are tons of guns, right?
Yeah.
And literally each gun is a play on something, right? So some of my favorite guns, and a gun you can get right out of the gate, is lowercase r, as in rabbit. Because what does the lowercase r look like? I mean, if you squint, a gun. Right? It's a gun.
That's so good.
The little stem up the back is your hammer, right? And then it's got it's like your
gosh.
barrel, right?
You're not wrong.
So it
awesome.
shoots out letters and it says words and stuff as you're playing.
So good.
And then one of my other favorite ones, and actually a friend of the show, Jeffrey, I was playing. I remember initially when I started playing, you can get a mailbox, and Jeffrey works for USPS, right?
Heck
and your
yeah.
dad worked for the USPS.
My dad
right?
was a USPS man. It's a USPS family.
Yeah, exactly. So you shoot out letters, and then on the final shot, you shoot out a package that either this is a little risque, but it either explodes, it poisons, or it just pops out glitter. So I mean, but those are just two examples. The amount of pop culture references is just astounding. The amount of references to other games like Gears of War, Metroid, Mega Man. I mean, there's just, you can actually get the Mega Hand. Like they call it Mega Hand. It's the Mega Buster, right? And the other really cool thing about all the guns, so many of the guns synergize. Like you literally get synergies. So, of course, the Mega Hand, there's another gun called the Mahogany.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And when you get that, it shoots out leaves and a pine cone, right? When you get that in conjunction with the Mega Hand, you get a synergy called Powered Up with W, just like in Mega Man. But they're not going to say Powered Up with Wood, like Woodman or something, because they're get in trouble for it. But then your Mega Hand literally shoots leaves out. So, I mean, it's just, it's super cool.
I had no idea this game was like quite this playful. In my head, without knowing too much about it, you hear Enter the Gungeon. I just sort of assumed it was going to be like a Wild West kind of theme, 6 shooters, revolvers, and like, maybe they do some joking around within that context, but it sounds like there's a lot more variety than I would have initially thought.
Yeah, there are. I mean, you're never ever going to see the same run. Every run is so different that you run through this game. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I love it. I can't ever get enough of it. I just played it last night. I started playing it last year, and I've probably played it about every day for that entire last year. I mean, there's definitely been a week or two here and there that I've taken off, but for me personally, it is the ultimate sit and relax. I mean, it seems weird, right? Because it's a really hard game.
I get it though. Yeah, when you have like a certain level of mastery over a game that is difficult like that, it scratches something in your brain where it's relaxing to show yourself that you're skilled at this thing and to go through.
Yep.
It's just so
absolutely
familiar. So then obviously there must be mechanics or something built into this game that keeps you coming back even after you've done a successful clear. Are there like I know other roguelikes have modifiers. Hades has the packs of punishment. Like, are there ways that you can tune up the difficulty to make further to keep you playing?
So I'm so happy you mentioned that, because
Yeah.
that is the place that it absolutely diverges away from Hades
Oh,
and just smacks you in the face. Yes, no, there's nothing. So it's funny because I was actually talking to our buddy Ross the other day. He's a Hades guy, man. He really
yeah.
likes Hades. I played it. When we went to MagFest, he told me play Hades, and I said, okay, I'll play Hades. You got to play Gungeon though. So he's
Fair's
he's been
fair.
he's been giving me some Gungeon updates. He's loving it right now, which it makes my heart smile. But anyway, I played Hades, and I eventually got good at the game. Beat it several times. Finally saw credits, and I remember talking to him like, I'm gonna do a new save. I'm just gonna go through it again. I'm gonna beat it. I'm gonna beat it right out of the gate. I'm so good at this game now. And he's like, yeah, it's probably not gonna happen. That's like the equivalent of 48 heat to go through on your very first try and try to beat it with. I'm like, I guess you're right. You don't have the extra dash. You don't have any of the extra
Yeah.
power ups. So the equivalent, as in like, if I talk about Enter the Gungeon, it took me 120 tries, right, to beat it on Stadia. It took me like 20 tries to beat it on Switch.
Wow.
It took me 0 tries. I never even had a death in that game when I booted up on my PC for the first time until
Wow.
I started speedrunning.
Yeah.
Right? Because then your speedrunning is the exact opposite of everything I said you should do.
Yep.
You don't clear the floors. All you're doing is looking for that boss. Like,
Yep.
it's actually frustrating when you can't find him, right? Because then you just watch that clock tick up. It's like, come on, where is it? But you can beat this game right out of the gate. If you're skilled, you beat it right out of the gate. So
Okay. Awesome.
a mechanic I kind of forgot to talk about. There's a dodge roll, so you can actually dodge through bullets.
Okay.
And then there's a blank that basically is a screen clear, right? So you can utilize that stuff in order to hopefully make it further. That's something that a lot of new players took me a long time, because there's actually an active item too that you can use in conjunction with your gun to get your brain wrapped around that. There's so much going on that you're just shooting for the most part, right? You forget about everything else. I have other tools, right? But as you get better and better, you're like, I have my blanks. Why didn't I blank there to clear screen? I couldn't have dodged that very well. I should have just blanked. I have my active. Why am I not using? I never touch it. It's like a bomb or something. Like, I'm not even I've never used it my entire run. Like, I need to use that. And you kind of train yourself. And then once you start doing that and putting it together in your brain, everything slows down. Like,
Yeah.
everything slows down as you get better at this game. Like, I could easily play the game and have a conversation with somebody at this point and not worry, as long as I'm not speedrunning it or something, right? I could do that, right? It's not. I wouldn't need to pause or stop and think and stuff like that. So I mean, it's definitely, as you play, you get so much better and it rewards your skill. So
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, you start learning to like keep all those resources you have in your head and available. And this is outside like the scope of what we normally would talk about here, but I will say I love that speedrunning is sort of the logical endpoint for you. I think this is true in so many games that it's a really good way to, when you've sort of like squeezed all the juice out of something that you can, to add in a little bit of extra difficulty and add in like a new way to engage with a game that you really like, to keep it fresh and fun, and to add like this whole other layer of almost endless difficulty, because you can always save just one more second off that time. You can always just shave a couple of frames off. You can be one room quicker, so
right,
it's
exactly.
addicting.
Exactly. So, yeah, just a couple more notes. Soundtracks by Dose One. He's an American rapper, so I mean, he's done stuff outside just video games, but the soundtrack's great. I mean, it's kind of a techno, your typical 1632-bit techno, upbeat. Everything's upbeat, right? There's so much going on all the time, so it really lends itself. Like, having a calm, serene soundtrack would not fit with this game, right?
Yeah,
So,
not at all.
yeah, so that's great. And then outside of that, I mean, I compare the Gungeon to it's like a bully, right? You think about you're in 4th grade, and there's a 6th grader that comes up and takes your lunch money every day. That's the first floor of Gungeon, and then finally you stand up to that 6th grader and you say, I'm not taking your stuff anymore, man. I've been training on my dad's punching bag at home, and I'm ready to stand up to you. And then finally he does not take your lunch money. Maybe he even gives you $1 because he's scared of you now. Then you come back the next day and you're on floor 2, and he brought his buddy, and he kicks the crap out of you again. And that is how it goes, right? You just have to continue to overcome, because the first floor, like typically most games, right? The first stage, pretty easy. You get through it, you feel good about yourself, then it starts to kick your butt. That is not how Gungeon is, man. It will, from the get-go, it makes you get good. So.
Yeah. It's an addicting loop. I haven't even played this game, but I can guarantee it's an addicting loop once you start to get into that rhythm and you feel yourself getting better. Oh, it's
Yes.
awesome. So.
Yep. It rewards. Yep, it definitely does.
Any other closing thoughts you had on Gungeon?
No, I mean, it's an excellent game. It definitely got me into the roguelike genre. I mean, I played Dead Cells, so I kind of had already done that type of thing, but yeah. Gungeon really, really taught me that dying isn't so bad, right? Like, it's just, honestly, if you think about a roguelike, right, what we can currently consider a roguelike or roguelite, it's just most NES games without continues.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it.
That's very true.
Yeah, I mean that's how all the games used to be. You would die and you'd have to restart, right? So once you kind of get over that initial I have to restart if I die, we've gotten soft as a gaming civilization. I think it's not so hard.
Yeah,
so.
it's addicting for sure. So.
Yep.
All right, well, you know what? It brings us to that moment then. It's time to slot it in. I have a suspicion I know where you would put this. However, I got to ask. I got to do the formal thing. Got to play Bob Barker's role. Is it a main quest or a side quest?
So, it being, honestly, some days it's probably my favorite game of all time, honestly. Definitely always top 5. So, it's very difficult to not put it in the main quest, but I'm not going to.
Whoa. Whoa. Explain yourself.
I know. See, I knew if I brought Gungeon, I tried to trick you, and then you could see the sheet, and then I knew I'd get you on this one. So
I'm floored.
It is the ultimate side quest game. The way I'm thinking about it is, I'm not just thinking about myself when I say this, right? I think about my first experiences with this game, and thinking about the typical, just average gamer, right? Mm-hmm. I think a main quest game, an average gamer would be able to pick up, play, enjoy, get their time out of no matter what. This is not going to happen. I mean, it is going to beat you down, and you are going to have to be stubborn in order to beat back, right? That's basically how it has to go. So it pains me to say it's a side quest game. If you enjoy this type of game, I mean, it's gonna be your deal. But it's the same way. It's somewhat difficult, even though I don't think it's nearly as difficult. But in the same vein, I would definitely call it a main quest game because of story and stuff. But Hades is the same way. I mean, it's nice because you can die and there's certain mechanics, but it's tough. A tough game is hard. A really hard game is hard to recommend to everyone. So,
yeah, no, you know what? You kind of knocked the wind out of me there for a second. I was like, what is happening in my world? I went a little lightheaded, but I think that makes perfect sense, right? We said it a couple of times. It's always, if you're a fan of this genre, this is a good example of one that you can play. In fact, we've mentioned Hades a bunch of times, but I know a lot of people got into this genre because of Hades. That was most people's first introduction to roguelikes at all. And so if you've played Hades and you're like, well, okay, I'm looking for more in this style, and I only have a toaster that can play games, well, enter the Gungeon. Go check it out.
Enter the Gungeon. Easy. I don't know how you played Hades. There must be a Hades edition, toaster edition or something. But.
Exactly. So there you go. We have Mutant Mud's Collection side quest and Enter the Gungeon side quest, but a glowing side quest. That's for dang sure.
Yep.
So I think it's time for us to then round out the show. Any overall thoughts on your first IndieQuest here? Did you enjoy the process? Would you come back?
I would absolutely come back. It's just a fantastic idea. Josh had a fantastic idea for this show. I mean, it's so good. Any person, anybody out there, tell your friends, because there is an indie game for everyone, gamer or not.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And so we'd love to have you back for sure. If all of you loved Drachma, which I know you did, he did stole the show, you can reach out to us and let us know. You can do that via Twitter at IndieQuestPod, or you can reach out to us via email at IndieQuestPod@gmail.com. If you want to just get a hold of me, you can find me at BlinkOom, that's OOM, like out of mana, on Twitter and Twitch are the most likely spots to find me. Or, if you're on that Patreon, hop on over into the Polykill Discord. You can find me there too. But where can they find you, Drachma?
They can find me on Twitter at Captain Drachma, Drachma. And also, please, I implore you, whenever Trav opens the floodgates again, but come on into the Polykill Discord. It's a great place to be, and I'll be in there too.
Heck yeah. And you can check that out on Patreon at, I think you can find it on Polykill or Polymedia Network. Or you can go to polymedianetwork.com where you can check out the whole network of shows without running through every single one, just other than Drunk Friend, which is where you came from. Give me one recommendation. Pull one show off the network that you enjoy listening to.
Petey's Power Hour. I was on that too.
Heck yeah. Michelle rules.
Okay. Polykill. Polykill's all right, I guess.
I mean, it's a top 5 show, I'll say.
top at least 7 on the network,
yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of shows. Petey's Power Hour, which is a combination of smart, talented people and alcohol mixed with a bunch of cool trivia. Tales of the Lesser Medium, which is hilarious. Drunk Friend, which is the show you probably heard of before you came here, but if not, has Alex Ness Drunk and Trav Ness Friend talking to an insanely wide pool of very talented people. Or if for some reason or another you can't get enough of me, you can go over to what I guess is the flagship show, whether or not that is fair to say or not, Polykill, which is your show all about beating video games.
Yes, sir. It's great.
Cool. And with that, as always, I will just say thank you so much for listening. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Drachma, for coming on. Thank you for everyone to stick around all the way to the end of the episode. Good to be back. I know that there's a couple of cobwebs growing in that feed, but we're here. We're happy to be providing stuff for you, in huge part to Drachma. So again, I cannot express my appreciation enough. And why don't you sign off to the people? Give them some parting words of wisdom.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate you, Steve, for letting me on, and appreciate Josh for creating everything, and can't wait for him to come back, play more indie games, and let us know about it.
Heck yeah.